Welcome back, or welcome for the first time. Depends on where you jump in. I just reviewed my last video and it was all over the place. Had lots of fun talking about different stuff. I am going to take a look at our current state of the world as it is right now, March 11th, I think. Lose track of days. We seem to be having a bit of a transformational shift in our world currently. Things have been building for a long time, and humanity seems poised on the brink of a shift to bring on a different kind of way of looking at the world that perhaps will change everything, at least hopefully anyway. For the last 500 years-ish, we have been going down the rabbit hole of reductionistic top-down control management. And I think looking at the 5G, AI, central control has taken us to the logical extreme, and the patient is rejecting the treatment. Humanity is pushing back against it because it goes against the very nature of the human spirit, which is indomitable, indominate. Can't beat us up. We rise above challenges, indomitable. There's a part of the human psyche that seeks and craves the comfort of social connection and all that goes with it. Very needs satisfying kind of thing, which has been kind of co-opted down the ages through a hierarchical power structure that seeks to control and direct the human energetic spirit rather than celebrating our intuitive creativity and our boundless expression of invention and recombination to come up with novel ways of living and dealing with things. So let's take a look at things from the control versus influence perspective. Hierarchies, by their nature, are a control organism, control structure, way of looking at the world. You have a small group at the top. Sometimes there's one person, sometimes there's a group. And then it goes down the pyramid where you get more middle managers, and then you get people who are actually doing stuff at the bottom. And then out here you get the outliers, humans that don't really fit into things. They don't fit the structure. They may be living within the society, but they do not they do not conform in a meaningful way, like buy into the control grid, and they live within it, but they're not of it. I wonder if that's where I fit in. Anyway, people have all these needs, and most people are not particularly capable of running their own lives through processing things in real time and find ways of staying on top of things. It sounds kind of confusing because our society really doesn't have language to talk about this in a meaningful way. I'm kind of trying to play around with these thoughts and find words to put to these concepts. So you have a hierarchy, which is like governments and armies and corporations are all run like that, where you have small group of controllers at the top, and they have people they control beneath them who have people they control beneath them, and so on down the road. Now, I worked as a teacher in elementary school, so I learned a lot about control and influence, and I came up with this concept of the more control you seek, the less influence you have, and the more energy you must put into the system to maintain it. Now, teaching is a 10-month affair, and at the end of that 10 months, there's kind of a reset, and then you get another group of kids, and then you start all over again. Now, over the long term, you end up with people coming up with different ways of surviving that kind of disempowering power structure, where their energy is harnessed and they get a portion of the benefit and the rest goes up the food chain. The other way of looking at things is if you have a different power structure. Think of a band of warriors. Here you have a bunch of independent fighters who are really good in their own right, and they choose to interact together, and they pick the best of them to lead them. So, if you want to talk about democracy, well, democracy is the tyranny of the majority, because if you have, everybody doesn't have to agree, you just have to get more than half, and they strong-arm the rest into it. The First Nations people had some interesting dynamics that they used to rule themselves. They had a council of elders. They would have a chief, and the chief would be the ruler. However, the chief basically they deferred to the council of elders. They're the most mature, sophisticated, long-term thinkers in the society. And people looked to them, not because they were higher up the food chain, but because of their wisdom, their ability to create cooperation and looking after everyone within the society. Collaboration and cooperation are the buzzwords there. So our society has taken the control thing to pretty much its extreme, where you look at the World Economic Forum and they're all talking and rubbing their hands together about transhumanism. We're going to change and make the species better. It's not working out so well. And they want everybody on a programmable digital currency that is accessible through digital ID. It's like Mark of the Beast. So the religious people talk about that because they knew the danger of control, right? And they would like everybody to live in a conformed little apartment where you get a bureaucrat's permission to leave your little zone, and you're only allowed to buy what they deem appropriate based on your safety and looking after the environment and all that stuff. Well, that's the ultimate extent of control, where you have a group of people that are all controlled by faceless bureaucrats who have no accountability to the people whose energy they're usurping, right? Because they are going to get you to do what they want you to do, and they're going to give you whatever crumbs they think that they can get away with giving you without you dying, for their benefit. And once your usefulness is done, then maid program. Hey, Canada, you need maid service? Yeah, people are just dying to go to the maid service. Okay, so if you go the other direction, where you have an interdependent community of people. Think of the city-state, where you have a group of people that all choose their leaders based on merit, and the leadership's merit is decided on how well that everyone in the society does, rather than any artificial number like how the government's doing. Like, most people don't really care how the government's doing if they're not doing well. Like, if you look at the state of the world in Canada right now, they're talking about GDP, and these statistics can be, manipulated. Bring in a whole bunch of people and change the dynamics. Hire a bunch of employees that work for the government, and no government employee actually makes money. They're all taking money out of the system, because work is done by manufacturing, resource extraction, providing services. That's work. Anything that the government does is parasitic. It's taking away from it. Like, if you look at a motor, you have work created through the internal combustion engine, and then you have things like power steering pumps and generators or alternators and air conditioners, and those are called parasitic loads. They take away from the power. They cost power to do them. Government is a parasitic load on society. And once the parasitic load reaches a certain point, and we're pretty much at the tipping point, societies, once they hit more than 50% of your energy is being extracted by the people who are regulating and managing things, then people start pushing back against it. And that's what you're seeing. Small government, where the parasitic load is light, people do better, society is wealthier and freer and opener, because really, if you hire more people in the government, what does government do? It regulates things. That's their whole purpose, to regulate society. Now, at some point, if you take rid of all the regulations, you can have an anarchistic society, and that only works if everybody is a self-actualized human being who's looking after the best interests of society. And the fewer of those that you have around, and the more people who are looking for their own personal ends, and they're not looking to the benefit of the group, then that's where regulations become more important, because then you have some way of having checks and balances in your society. So what does all this have to do with control and influence? Well, there's something called the bell curve, right? It's a chart, and right on the bottom you have number of people, and the side is can be anything. But if you look at intelligence versus number of people, not very many people at the bottom end, not very many people at the top end, but it looks like kind of like a bell. So most 2/3 of the population, 85 to 115%, or that's their IQ, 85 to 115, 100 being average. So it takes it's really a measure of your processing speed and memory, intelligence. That's how they measure it. I mean, it gets more subtle than that in different ways, but it depends on what your purpose of measuring the intelligence is for. But when it comes down to being able to function as an independent or interdependent adult, most people are pretty okay with somebody else telling them how to live their life within a range, so they have some choice. And there are a small number of people, maybe 10% at the top, who are capable of processing things quickly enough in real time to be able to make choices in real time in order to manage themselves and the people who depend on them. Ideally, this is how a hierarchy will function. You have somebody, if it's based on merit, then you have a possibility of having a a viable, functional society where there's a balance between regulation and freedom, between safety and self-expression, because people express themselves in different ways, and not everybody is capable of assessing things to the point where what they're doing is a net benefit to the group or the planet or whatever criteria you're using to manage yourself. So you have control and influence. Okay, so our society is heading far too far in the control area. We are in need of a regulatory reset where there's a balance between how much regulation there is versus how much freedom you have, because there is no ultimate freedom on planet. You got a body, you got to maintain it. It's the tyranny of the physical form, right? You got maybe 70, 80, 90 years to live if you're lucky. And in that time, you spend a good chunk of it figuring out how to do things. And then by the time you get my age, I'm pushing 70, you kind of figure out, okay, well, what's the best use of my information and who can I share it with and how can I use this to make our social structure better for the future, right? Because if you're not looking to the future and how you can improve the species and your society, then really you're not much of an adult in my books. Adults aren't people that try to control others. They try to lift others up. You might have a different definition of adulthood, but interdependence is adulthood. Like, I've studied all this stuff in school and I've lived it too, where you get children who are totally dependent. They can't do anything without mommy and daddy until they reach a certain age. Usually around teenagehood, they've started making expressions of their own. And I mean, that's what teenagehood is it's the internal and external conflict between I am my family and I am an individual. It's the dependent to independent kind of thing going on. But once you're independent, you realize that when you work together with other people, together you can create things that you can't do individually. Think of your body. It's just a group of cells. They differentiate for purposes, and each of them specializes to some degree in order to do a specific job in order for the whole organism to live. Now, society is not quite that specialized and of singular purpose. People should be able to do a variety of different things. If you're only able to do one thing, then you're pretty much robotic in your behaviors. Right? You can't... Just think about the people who push the goalposts in different areas in our society. They tend to be polymaths, people who can do everything well. They're good at music, they're good at art, they're good at philosophy, theology, science, social interactions. Like, they tend to be good at everything. They tend to be the people at the top end of the bell curve in very many different areas, not just intelligence. There's different kinds of intelligence that people have come up with, like social intelligence and mathematical intelligence and musical or artistic intelligence. Like, so people can excel in different areas because people aren't just great at everything. It takes motivation, inclination, and practice and inspiration to actually excel at anything. So, you've only got so many hours in the day and you've only got so much energy that you can manage. So there's only so much you can do in any one field. So some people specialize in one particular field and they are not that adept at other ones. And then there are some people who are generalists. People like, I'm a bit of a generalist myself. I get kind of bored about doing one thing, so I dive into it, get really good at something, and then my attention gets distracted elsewhere and I go into another area. So I've got pretty good at interlacing, making a web of all the different things I can do, and using intuitive leaps to join different areas of understandings around. And through my studies of and living, I've been exposed to a whole variety of different disciplines that seemingly separate but interdependent if you chunk up a little. Like I studied NLP and one of the neuro-linguistic programming, and one of the things that they do is they look at chunking. So you can go from the very concrete to the very abstract. The people who make the most money in our world tend to be the people with the highest level of abstraction that are still connected to the world and society. People who are totally disconnected, they're totally abstract, they're the philosophers. They don't tend to be the richest people because there's no real world connection. So the people who are able to move facilely between different disciplines and have a reasonably high level of understanding, and by understanding, every different discipline has a paradigm that they exist within, where there's certain things that they believe, certain values that are important. And when you dive into a discipline and you learn all that stuff, and then you go to another discipline, there is carryover, but there are differences. And to be able to move between different disciplines and being able to find connections and commonalities between them, and then weave patterns of understanding so that you can connect the disconnected ones in some meaningful way, that's where inspiration comes in, and then people reach a level of understanding that is beyond what anybody in the individual different disciplines has. And really, humans are not just single focus for the most part. Even if you're really super into one particular discipline, quite often they have interest in others as well, because when you grow up, you're exposed to a variety of things when you're young, and you have hobbies and sports and interests that you pursue, and then some of them become lifelong, others don't, but you get a well-rounded kind of viewpoint that has got certain peaks and certain valleys in it, in understandings and competencies. So how does that got to do anything with influence and control? Well, if you're going to influence your world, you need to understand the impact that different courses of action are going to have on not just yourself, not just your immediate family or your company or community, but what's the global impact? What's the environmental impact? How is this going to change the course of social evolution, right? So if you study different disciplines and come with different ways of looking at the world, it gives you a broader perspective. So you can come at it from a bunch of different ways and find a course of action that will weave a path through them, using them, that will give you better outcomes than if you just looked at it from one point of view. So then you come down to energy, and how does that all fit in with it? Well, and we look at energy from an individualistic point of view. And we look at it from, you eat food, you digest it, you end up with the ash, it comes out the back end, and you expend energy in your daily life, and you use some of that energy to push forward your interests in different areas. And some people call it work, some are hobbies. It doesn't really matter. I mean, the difference between work and a hobby is economics generally, right? A lot of people do things for hobbies they would never dream of doing for money. And in fact, many hobbies, there really is not much money in it if you were to apply it to as a job. So that's one aspect of energy. I mean, we utilize the sun's energy in various forms. In the hydrocarbons are stored sun energy. We directly use photovoltaics and solar collectors for heat, and wind power, wave power, tidal power. We have water power from gravity using dams, generators. So we have that electrical, biomechanical kind of energy thing going on. We live on a dynamic, electrically charged planet in an electrically charged universe. And there are levels of energy that we can measure, and there's levels of energy that appear to be functioning that we don't currently have ways of measuring directly. So that was that whole deep dive I did in how human beings use their thoughts and emotions to access source energy, because things are moving along in different ways on our planet, and you do not need to directly interact with others in order to shift the energy patterns, because the Earth apparently resonates at, I think, 440 hertz or something like that. I could be wrong. That's what I tune my guitar to, because apparently they shifted it to 432 hertz, and it forms a discord in energy. So I've been playing around with 440 hertz. I think it's an A. Apparently gives you a better resonant frequency pattern. And I play music for, personal interest and for self-expression. And I have different... Oh, God, my dog wants in. Excuse me. Come. Yeah, there's energy patterns everywhere. So we use our energy to do different things. We talked last time about prayer and meditation and wishing and dreaming and hoping. Those are all ways of attracting resonant patterns into your life that will shape the course of how things interact between you and your society. So how on earth do you do that? Well, last time we talked about faith healing and prayer and meditation, and those aren't the only ways of doing it, right? Like I used to be in construction, and when you're in the zone, they call it, like painting or building stuff. Like once you master a skill, then it gets repetitive and you're doing the same thing. And so you don't actually consciously have to think about what you're doing. Like the work is not a cognitive activity because you've trained yourself to do that. So then your mind is able to focus on the overall vision of what you're trying to accomplish and how each action you take fits into it. Is that not a form of working with energy? Are you not enticing that structure to build itself because sometimes it feels like that's just the way it is? I studied boat building too because I like to sail. And the Chinese masters that built the junks, they did not use a plan, a blueprint. It just looked right to them. They just did it by feel, by touch, by intuition, by inspiration, and they created masterful shaped hulls that were aerodynamically or hydrodynamically very, very efficient. They created boats from an idea in their head, and that's how a lot of stuff happens. Our society doesn't move ahead because you get, brainy scientists who comes up with all this stuff. Usually it's some fringy dude who's out on the fringe of stuff going, gee, I wonder about that. I wonder if that's going to work. Like, think Einstein working in a patent office, bored out of his mind because he was just reading stuff over. And I guess there's a lot of downtime. But he would just fantasize about, wonder what would happen if I went close to the speed of light. What would things look like? And that's where he came up with the inspiration, that plus his mathematical understanding, to come up with the theory of relativity and special relativity and all that stuff. People come up with inspiration who are on the edge. Nikola Tesla, he was a weirdo, fringy dude. He came up with our whole alternating electricity thing. Him and Thomas Edison were battling it out because Edison wanted the DC thing, which is, they both have their uses, but DC for a power grid for the country, it makes no sense. You'd be using these huge copper conductors, and then the heat loss and energy loss through them is just fantastic. Whereas alternating current, you can just whack the voltage way up there and use tiny little lines big as my finger and carry hundreds of thousands of volts through long distances with minimal losses. How did he come up with that? Well, he was a fringe dude thinking about stuff on the edge. So these are called gamma rats. There's alpha rats and beta rats, the leaders and the followers. And then there's the gamma. They're the people on the outside who are going, gee, I wonder if we did it that way. Maybe that would work better. So we need to have room in our society where there's enough structure so that people have a degree of stability and comfort, and enough openness, freedom, so that different ideas are not just rejected out of hand. Now, one of the downsides of running a society based on economics or money is that, well, our society has something called corporations. And corporations they've been given the rights of a human being without the obligations. Because you can't put a corporation in jail, you can't punish them, all you can do is fine them. But corporations also can't die. So there are, they just change their leadership out, and they can keep going for, like, look at the Hudson's Bay Company, which is struggling in Canada now under 10 years of the Liberal government's mismanagement. It's been around for like hundreds and hundreds of years, and then 10 years and it's almost out the door. But a corporation, some of the corporations will buy up ideas and suppress them because it goes against their business model, and they just want to have continuity rather than change. Because look what happened to the different giants from the 80s and 90s, like my brother used to work for Digital Equipment Corp, and they were a big company, but then they didn't keep up and they started losing market share. And companies will go to great lengths to keep their market share, including buying up and suppressing patents. That happens a lot, especially when you have a new technology that comes out that is going to suppress the demand for the product that the big company has, so they'll buy up patents and just sit on them because, if nobody can do that because I own the patent and I'll sue you if you start it up, then they can maintain their monopoly, because monopolies are the antithesis of freedom, right? If somebody has got the monopoly on something, then nobody else can do it. So there we go, balance, and you get that balance again. Right? You got control and influence. So we have to use our influence as individuals because we outnumber them hundreds of thousands to one. So individually, we're insignificant. Just like grains of sand are insignificant. Tell that to a sandstorm that'll eat through a telephone pole and knock it on the ground just because all these grains of sand were beaten against it. So individually we are insignificant. Organized together in structures, we are the power on this planet. And our ability to influence the energetic source fields through our thoughts and emotions is a very powerful thing. And that's what religions do, right? They go and get everybody aligned in the same thinking and for the same purpose, and they hold this thought with a high emotion, high vibration emotion like joy, love, caring. There's people that have made a big study of this, and they've come up with all kinds of different words. And words are power, because every word has a concept, and that concept triggers an emotion, and that emotion is a driver that affects the source energy field when connected with a thought. So this is how we operate in our world. We're energetic beings influencing our world all the time. We can't directly control it in many ways, but we can influence it. And the more you focus on that influence, the more power you can generate. And the more people align together for a singular purpose, then the more power they can access and align. And if it's for a reason that is beneficial to the collective, then the buy-in is a lot more powerful, the motivation is a lot more potent, and the effect is unstoppable. It's the immovable force meets the unstoppable force meets the immovable object. Well, those are both metaphors, and it's all a balance anyway, because there's no unstoppable force and there's no immovable objects in this earthly plane. So we get to play around with it, and it's about who's got the power, which means who's controlling the narrative. You maybe wonder why they're doing a whole lot of control the narrative stuff. Canada and Britain, they're actually arresting people and throwing them in jail for saying things that are mean. Ooh, my, how the mighty have fallen, eh? Gang rapes are fine, but don't insult somebody's religion, man. That'll be a jail time for you. So this is the kind of state of the world we're in. So you have to make a decision as an individual. What's important to you? Where do you want to settle out? What's the greatest vision of the future that you can come up with? Or what is the greatest vision of the future that somebody else has come up with that resonates with you, and you go, yeah, I want that. That's where I want to go. I believe that. I can get behind that, right? So I'm not saying that you should follow anything I'm doing, because my vision of the future is everybody's following their own heart. Everybody's got a different vision of the future. And if we work together and find ways of connecting in larger groups, because society isn't one monolithic thing. Just think of your own life. You may have hobbies and sports where you hang out with one group of people, and you may have work group friends that you hang out with. You may have friends in different things, like school friends, people from your past. There may be political allies that you've got in your life, people who are a member of a party that you support, because that's just another power structure. So power structures are neither good nor bad. It's what is their purpose, and how supportive are they of the collective as opposed to their own personal ideological goals, right? Because if you're not in support of what the collective wants, like all the people that are aligned with the thoughts that you've been putting out, then you're not going to have staying power. You're more lining up with the control rather than the influence part. I think that's enough for today, and just think about who you want to align with.